This graph shows how many scientific papers have been written about autism every year since 2011. You can see a steady increase every year, showing that research into autism is trending and there's more and more research being done in and around autism. Now, in 2025, there were an estimated 9,500 scientific papers written around autism. That is like 3 times as much as 10 years ago, which is incredible. However, there's a very important second graph that you haven't seen anywhere. And this is a graph but focused only on those scientific papers that come from a neurodiversity perspective. We see that here the trend is not linear but exponential. About every 2 years, there's a doubling of the amount of papers being published from a neurodiversity paradigm. In 2025 alone, that was almost 700 papers, which is almost 10% of all of papers published around autism in that year. Now, in order to explain what we're seeing here, this hockey stick and this explosion in empirical and theoretical papers talking about neurodiversity using keywords like neurodivergence and neurodiversity, scientists have been calling upon the work of philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn. Because Thomas Kuhn wrote about how science can sometimes have these huge increases in conceptual thinking to try to make sense and to come up with new models. Thomas Kuhn talks in this regard of what he calls a paradigm shift. This is a phrase that has made its way into popular culture. A paradigm is just the taken for granted assumptions. It's easy to understand what a paradigm is, but it's way harder to apply it to our own thinking and see what are the ways of doing, the values, and the goals that I have that are driving me and driving my behavior. Similarly, it's the whole point of a paradigm is that you don't have to think about it. It's taken for granted, it's implicit, and you can just do science as usual. This is what we see in the steady accumulation of the old paradigm. But in the new paradigm, we have this explosive increase in amount of papers coming out, where there's a lot of conceptual searching and a lot of new terms and new theories and new problems that are able to be solved. This is typical of what Kuhn calls a period of scientific revolution. And if this is really happening in autism science, then it is crucial for autistic people to know about this, because it impacts all of the interactions that we might have, be it when we're getting a diagnosis or searching out for therapy, or even on social media or with family and friends. Because paradigms guide the thinking implicitly and guide how people even look at reality. This could help explain why we sometimes hear that, oh, you don't look autistic, or, oh, don't make autism your whole identity, and other types of comments. When we apply this paradigmatic lens, it makes sense to say these things when you think that autism is a brain disorder. If autism is a brain disorder, then of course, don't make it your whole identity, just like you wouldn't make cancer your whole identity, because, well, you should try to get better. In a similar way, people saying, well, you don't look autistic might be saying, well, you don't look like you have a brain disorder. Now, there's 3 important aspects to every single scientific paradigm according to Kuhn. And I'm not a philosopher, I'm a psychology last year graduate student, so I'm going to explain this in a way that isn't as good as philosophy students could. But knowing these different terms has helped me, and I hope will help you, make sense of these types of experiences that we face constantly. The first aspect to every paradigm is what we call its ontology. And that is what the paradigm believes it is studying. What is autism? And I've already talked about the vision of the old paradigm, which is that autism is a brain disorder composed of deficits and impairments that make the people who have it lesser than neurotypical individuals. A second important aspect of every paradigm is its epistemology. Now, epistemology is what the paradigm thinks is knowledge, and how do we get to that knowledge? In the old paradigm, knowledge around autism was mostly gathered by talking to professionals, psychiatrists, and psychologists who had studied autism in books. And finally, the axiology, the values that guide the paradigm. In the old paradigm, the values that guide are cure and treatment, trying to make autistic people more like non-autistic people. Now, if we go back to that explosive growth of papers coming from a neurodiversity paradigm, we can see that they operate under completely different philosophical assumptions. And this clash is what Kuhn says can sometimes lead two paradigms to not be able to talk with one another, because they literally look at the world and see something different based on the values and ontology and epistemology that they take for granted. Autism researchers have been trying to make sense of this old paradigm and of this epistemology, this ontology, and this axiology. And one of the core findings is that this deficit paradigm is deeply dehumanizing. And the way these assumptions are dehumanizing is because it assumes that autistic people have a broken sense of self and are unable or unwilling to have deep mutual relationships. Now, if you've seen my previous video, you know that a sense of self and attachments are the two main aspects of human personality. And by denying autistic people these, we are literally dehumanizing and putting them at a lower level as though they are less. So, next time you're struggling with uncertainty or anxiety or confusion around autism, now you know that we're in a critical period of a paradigm shift. And we're still sorting out altogether what exactly we're keeping from the old paradigm, what's going to be a continuity between them and us, and the new paradigm is still finding itself out and getting a sense of identity, which again is not something that the deficit paradigm even allows autistic people to have. This period of uncertainty is felt in my own life, and I believe in many autistic people's lives, because we ourselves are in this transitional period in the middle where we have certain neurodiversity concepts and language that we use, but at the same time, the water that everybody's been swimming in for the last 50 years is really this deficit paradigm. That's kind of the situation we're in at the moment, and it can get really messy. I hope this helps to explain what might be happening when, for example, you go to see a therapist, and the therapist swims in the water of the deficit paradigm, just like most everybody does, and uses language and terms and ways of looking at autism and at you that feel dehumanizing and like unjust and not recognizing of your own subjective personal experience. Now, this is a perfect place to see just how that taken for granted manifests. Because for somebody who's always been educated and lived in the deficit paradigm, this is not even a thing that they worry about. This is not even a reality. We're just doing things as we've been told. And I don't think we should be critical of that, because this doing things as they've always been done, so to speak, is critical to functioning. It's critical to individual psychological functioning, and it's critical to science. you need to have certain assumptions and certain values that you take for granted. This is why Kuhn is so useful to think about all of this, because he says that different paradigms occur and there's big rupture moments between them, but there's always continuity to be found. At least in psychology and in medicine, there are continuities and ways to connect with the old paradigm. But this is all going on at the moment, and this is what I've been seeing in science papers and in the clinical setting. I hope this was a useful video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.